Welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Back on the podcast in an all-new role, veteran retailer Gillon joins us as the CEO at Peninsula Co-op, a Victoria-based multi-business unit retailer specializing in fuel, convenience, liquor, and grocery. Tons of great insights from this global retail leader whose career has spanned massive retailers all the way to cannabis startups. Let's listen in now. Corey, welcome back to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Well, the last time you were on the podcast, different role, different time. So really excited to get you back on and learn what you've been up to and what you're doing today. And where am I finding you today? Where are you sitting?
Yeah, you're finding me in sunny, beautiful British Columbia, Victoria, British Columbia, to be exact.
Fantastic. I went there with my family. I'd been to Vancouver and Victoria a bunch of times, and they'd, particularly my kids are in their 20s, had never been. And I thought they'd like Vancouver more, being young 20-something-year-olds, but they love Victoria. So just loved Victoria. So they were like, yeah, another big city. But Victoria, that was something different. So I share your enthusiasm for that city. Well, listen, we've kind of jumped right in. Why don't we start for maybe those who didn't hear our first interview a ways ago? Tell us about yourself, your background, particularly in retail, and what you do for a living today.
Yeah. So currently, my role here in Victoria, I'm based here as the CEO of a retailer called Peninsula Co-op. And we are essentially a multi-business unit retailer, kind of spanning three business units, being grocery, liquor, and fuel and convenience. And for the most part, our business is on Vancouver Island, and our revenues are about $300 million a year, just north of. We just added an acquisition to this business, so we'll have a nice little spike going into the next year. So that's currently what I'm doing today. My background, as you know, Michael's predominantly retail based. Probably to summarize that in the best way. I spent 18 years kind of, cut my teeth, if you will, with Walmart. Spent 18 years with them, both domestically and a stint with them internationally. Kind of three functions, I suppose, that would kind of round that out. To large scale operations. So came through the operations and store business for the most part for the first part of my career, and ended up running the Western Canadian business. Overall, which was a large business, it was a 22,000 odd associates, a $7 billion P&L. So certainly scale. I think that's one thing that Walmart certainly brings to the party. Moved later onto the international side of the business. Spent some time on the M&A side and integration side of the business, and ultimately Walmart at that time and probably 2009, 2010, I was really looking to acquire healthy businesses abroad, and for the most part, brick and mortar retailers. And my job was to help support build out the valuation model for those businesses, and ended up being a part of an acquisition that led me to a 2-year stint of integration in Johannesburg. So kind of worked throughout sub-Saharan Africa for 2 years, which was a really interesting, both professionally and personally, I suppose. And then finally kind of rounded out that in e-commerce. So I was kind of early stage, I suppose, omni-channel. I don't think really I knew what that meant, back in 20.
I'm not sure anybody still does some days. But.
Yeah. So it was a very, very early stage business, looking at all the places that we were looking to essentially kind of integrate our physical assets with this new thing called eCommerce that we were doing in Walmart Canada. That for the most part was we were a little bit late to the party, to be honest. So essentially some time there, and then ended up moved around a lot from that in different parts of the country, in different parts of the world. I think about 9 or 10 different cities and countries along the way. And then ended up, I was in Toronto at the time, and working out of Walmart Canada's head office. and had an opportunity to come back to Vancouver, which was home for me, and hadn't lived here in quite some time. It's where family was, and a place I really wanted to eventually kind of get back to, and joined Aritzia as their senior vice president of retail about 6 months before they were going public. And so met the founder, a fellow named Brian Hill, and we hit it off quite early, and joined their business for really interesting I'd say dichotomy to kind of go from a very, very large scale retailer to this upstart boutique. Although Aritzia had been around a long time, certainly this was just starting to kind of make its tracks into the U.S. For the most part. So really exciting time to be with that business overall. And then kind of rounding out my career in retail before coming to Peninsula Co-op in the startup space. And I think the last time we chatted, I was in the retail cannabis space.
Right. Choom, right?
Yeah, Choom. Right.
Great brand. Yeah.
Really, it was kind of great to kind of move around from this, the Fortune 1 company, if you will, to kind of a boutique retail in apparel, and obviously a different position than Walmart, and then into the startup space, and really that was. I think the big difference there was kind of the difference between being an executive and being a builder of a company. I think those are very, very different things that I was able to do in that. And that really kind of led, we sold that business in the summer of 2022. And, I was sitting in the south of France, actually, with me and my wife and my my young son. And was kind of, contacted by a recruitment firm, and the rest is history. This looked like a very interesting thing to do, and here we are.
Well, what a journey you've had. I mean, there's a couple of thoughts off the top. I mean, would you advise this kind of idea that you join, whether it's, Walmart or another major company, and anchor your skills in both international and scale and scope and structure, and I guess a bit of bureaucracy, you can say? I mean, that's how you started your career. I think it's interesting because I find there's two kinds of, very broadly speaking, two types of executives: those who thrive in that environment and never want to leave. They're a cog in a big machine, and they work very well in that machine. But sometimes when you take a cog out of a big machine on its own, it doesn't do so well. So you're a bit of a unicorn, if I can say, moving from something that gigantic to something very, Choom was very small but very nimble, right? Is that how you saw your career path, or did you kind of just move that way? Like, how intentional were you from, I'm going to start with someone really big and then work down and kind of discover or articulate my entrepreneurial roots? How did you think about that as you moved through your career?
Yeah, good question. I don't think it's intentional as it may sound, or as linear maybe as it may look.
As it will be in the book, right? In the book, it'll be more intentional.
Exactly. This was all planned. I think and I think there's the question, I suppose, where you could say, is it better to start in a startup and work your way through to a large organization? Is it better to start a large organization and work your way down? I don't know if I have the answer for everybody, but I think for myself, I found that the pedigree, certainly that you were able to take from a company like Walmart and the learnings from it, is how do you apply them later, and how do you apply them in small business, but at the right size? And I think, I guess the part that I found quite interesting is you're right. I think it was very difficult to spend a tremendous amount of time in a large organization, because I think just that piece of, you want to be able to build something. And I think when I had moved from Walmart and moved to Aritzia, and I'm now working for a founder-led organization, to be fair, I really started to really get that urgency, if you will, or that want and need to build something at the end of the day. And I think, the big difference, when I kind of say the difference between executives and builders, or managers and builders, I suppose, is not to pick out one or the other being better than the other. But, it's very different than most, many executives, and me included. You're working off a P&L, you're working off of an income statement, you're controlling some levers that support the organization overall. But you're not raising capital on a given day. You're not managing cash flow in a 13-week window to ensure everyone gets paid at the end of the day. So all of those sorts of things. That's a very, very different piece, and I think either you thrive in that, or you find it motivating, or not. And I think there's a balance of all of those things. But I certainly have liked many parts of my entire journey.
Well, let's talk about Peninsula Co-op. So you gave us a brief introduction at the beginning, but for those who aren't aware, A, of the co-op structure coming out of the West, and then B, the material fact that you work for customers. So I'm a member of like a credit union, so I'm very familiar with co-op kind of broad structure. But start with where Peninsula exists in an overall system, and then just a little bit about the nature of who owns you and how that influences how you talk and the decisions you make and all those different things in that business.
Yeah, it's and I think even for myself, a bit of a what I believe I maybe thought I knew, and what I've kind of learned throughout has been, I think a very interesting journey. And so a cooperative structure essentially is a member-owned business. We have 116,000 members essentially that own us. And when I speak to folks that are the most relative, or come from capital markets as an example, I kind of, it's kind of like shareholders, if you will, except no one holds a position of more than one share.
Right.
And
they buy those shares too, right? Just so for anyone who doesn't know, you've got to buy your share in the Peninsula Co-op. What is it, $27 did I see?
You betcha. And that's a one-time share buy-in. And that essentially kind of starts to create what is this really interesting differentiation. And this business, Peninsula Co-op, has been here since 1977. Its genesis was in grocery, for the most part, that kind of kickstarted these, the business as it is today. And co-ops kind of come from, for the most part, where there was lack of services, or for the most part, and so they tended to pop up in a lot of places in Western Canada, maybe where there wasn't a chain that had moved into those locations, as an example, or not. Maybe the credit union example, maybe some of the big banks had kind of stepped in as some of the reasons why these things started or existed in the first place. And as the three big components as it relates to our business. Is the member, in this case, is essentially our owner, and is extremely important in this. And in fact, elects the members of our board, and is really the reason from a customer standpoint, or a patronage perspective, if you will, why we're successful. And when I look at the idea of being a member and why you want to shop with the business, and ultimately beyond kind of supporting a business that you believe is member owned, driven, therefore community based. What we do is in terms of output. But it also has a cycle that makes the business more and more successful, and that is that the members essentially it's an extremely strong loyalty program as a result. So much of our patronage percent, so members shopping with us is a key metric for us. Kind of exceeds 90% in many of our locations, depending on whether that's in a fuel and convenience location, a grocery location, or even our liquor store. So I think across those things, it very much is a place of differentiation. And I would imagine when you start to think about those kind of true member-owned programs, I would imagine anyone who's running a current loyalty program in a regular organization or maybe a non-cooperative structure would die for those kind of numbers.
Right.
That they were getting that kind of low 2%. So it's kind of a full circle, if you will, as it relates to the business model.
Now, just a little bit more on the business model. So, grocery is a scale business to some degree at the buying level anyway. And so you're part of the federated co-op business, right? So talk about that a little bit, that you share in the buying power of a central organization, yet at the same time, you've got your own co-op and your own members. Am I getting that right? Is that an accurate description?
Yeah, that was probably some of the learnings that I had kind of early on, and getting a good understanding as to our wholesale side of the business. Where do our products come from, and how does that work? And with us being a member-owned, locally member-owned retail business, a lot of the cooperatives, and I think it's about 160 odd cooperative retailers in Western Canada for the most part. And what those groups had done is essentially, at some point, we're looking for a leveraged buying power, and how do we kind of pool our resources, pool our monies together, that sort of thing, that we can get some scale and leverage, to your point. And so the cooperative retailers, including us, took a position or own a position of federated cooperative, and that is so that's a Saskatoon based business that, for the most part, is the wholesale provider of grocery, fuel. It's one of owns a refinery in Regina. So you can imagine the significance in terms of how large that is. There's obviously not a lot of refineries in Canada to begin with,
right?
And then, as well as some back end services, some accounting services, marketing, those sorts of things that depending and providing structure and governances and that sort of thing that are all kind of I guess a good guideline and for not only Peninsula Co-op, for some of the other retail systems as well.
So very important for a business that sometimes buys in tonnage, right? Measures sales in tonnage, and that goes right through to the flyer, right? The flyer is shared by all of you, and how do you balance? Because sometimes I'm sure that not all items come in or arrive. Maybe you don't select some of the items. What percentage would you say when you put the flyer that you cooperate in on the street? Are you close to 100%, or how do you even manage that at the store level?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think from our standpoint, we kind of put out a flyer, and maybe one of the learnings that I've had, when you kind of work with a business as centralized, I suppose, as a Walmart, as an example, what you put out on the flyer, that's the invitation to your customers that week. You better have it, right. At the end of the day. I think we for the most part strive to put what's in the flyer, particularly key items, and make sure they're in place. I think we kind of have the volume that supports that. That we're able to do that, and I think that there is likely some from time to time. I probably wouldn't be able to put a percentage to peripheral items that maybe we wouldn't carry, but I think when we start to look at that front page, back page mentality. We make sure that we're in a good position for the customer on those things.
So you've moved through big mass merch retail, which of course has a bit of food in it, a lot of food actually. When you look at where it is today in Canada and the U.S., apparel, consumables like cannabis and alcohol. So talk about the differences you're experiencing, not just in the business model, because the business model has to take some time to get your head around, but just in being a grocer, because you're a grocer now. Which is, you're also a fuel reseller, alcohol, but primarily you're a grocer, right? What's that adjustment been like? The vendor relationships, just the structure and the pace, and there's a lot of publicity around the price of these things, for example, on a day-to-day basis. What's that been like for you?
Yeah, I think a few things. I think if I kind of categorize. I look at grocery, maybe I'll categorize them into three buckets. Certainly there's big box, and the Walmarts, the Costco's, the world that are, are massive grocery players. They from the time I was there till today, I think they're the largest grocer in the world overall. The conventional players, although larger in Canada, the Loblaws, the Metros, the Sobeys, that sort of thing. And then, I think where we sit is community. And I think in each one of those buckets, I would, think that what is important and what we're working on is different than maybe a big box retailer or a conventional player might be working on. Generally all expecting kind of the same, idea in terms of pleasing the customer. But a big box retailer might be more focused on micro fulfillment for rapid delivery, as an example, and be investing, tremendous amount of dollars. Maybe some of the conventional players might be doing that as well. Where on the community side, we're kind of, I'd kind of boil it down to kind of three things at least that we're focused on the grocery side. The first one is service. And when I look at, less about the in and out convenience, speed of customer through the store, we're more focused on the service at the checkpoint. So whether that's at the butcher counter, or whether that's at the deli counter, whether that's at the bakery or in produce. So I think for the most part, service is very important to us. So oddly enough, wanting to increase dwell time for the customer to a certain degree. And I think our members kind of speak to that. The second piece is fresh. And I suspect you could probably go through those three kind of segments of grocery retail. And I think you'll probably hear that likely through all three. And I think the third bucket for us, at least that we're focused on is on the private label side. And I think that's not only, maybe the traditional sense of wanting to make sure that you're strong and there for better margins and some level of exclusivity and so on. But I think it's important for us to have an option, and particularly an option in these days as it relates to value. And I think having that, those kind of three components for us is where we're focused as it relates to a community grocery retailer.
Now, you said off the top something I just wanted to come back to, that you'd made some acquisition. And it's interesting in a bunch of ways. One is that it's very front forward on the website. It's like, hey, members, we are growing again, which is just a very different tack that is typical for a co-op. Talk about the growth. What did you just buy into, and why did you do that? And how does that fit into the plan? And is it a geography plan, or is it let's just bring together more points of presence? How do you think about that?
Yeah. Maybe I'll start with the plan, and I think that that'll kind of lead into to the acquisition and maybe the thought process, and ultimately the pulling the trigger on this particular one. So as I kind of came into the business, maybe I guess 10 months ago now. And sort of, I think back to buy a very, I would say, progressive board. So, a very, maybe not where I would have thought or perceived, rather, a cooperative board to be. And so certainly, and from that, much of what the board was looking for was, hey, we've got a really, really strong core business here. A good chunk of it is fuel based, and is there some sort of at some point some limit to that growth? And how do we strike on something today while we're very strong? So kind of coming into the business and building out kind of a 3-year plan. We really focused on four things, and the first one was do more of what we do really well, and that was kind of the exceed and maximize our member relationships. And so I won't get too much into that bucket, but I just kind of call it out. The second one was really focused on being a great place to work, and because we know that talent is a challenge, even in parts of the country where it'd be very desirable to move to, it's still maybe feel like sometimes even more a challenge to attract and retain and engage people. The third one was really about building infrastructure in the business, and so structuring ourselves in a way to become more of a 365 degree retailer, and I think that by that bringing in much of our as it relates to what we were going to do in the future. And then the fourth bucket, which was around diversification, both of products, services, and business lines. And so hopefully that kind of maps out kind of our four pillars around our strategic plan. That kind of led to diversification. What does that look like? And within that, how fast do we want to go? And so we set targets for a fairly fast move, if you will, that we were going to go through, do it through M&A, something that had been spending quite a bit of time on in previous life and previous lives, I suppose.
Yeah.
And ultimately, what kind of businesses were we looking at to do that? So obviously, the ones that we're already in, and expanding those probably makes sense to look at first. And in liquor, we had a fairly small, I'd say a toehold, if you will, in that we only had two liquor locations, two liquor stores that had come on board as a result of an acquisition about 18 months before I'd arrived. And then we start to look, geography-wise, not only where we were, but in other parts of the province as well. That we think that would make a ton of sense to acquire and bring into the fold. And the acquisition kind of led that we announced, I guess about 3 weeks ago now, for 7 locations, predominantly here in the Southern Island, a business called Liquor Express. We picked up 7 of their locations essentially, and we'll build that into our portfolio as I would say a much more significant player in liquor retail, and ultimately clustering kind of the markets that we're in. The benefit, I suppose, strategically, Michael, is we see it in this market in particular, or in our home market, as kind of that halo to our membership, kind of continuing to expand. So, if we can get those kind of patronage numbers, that we have in our kind of core business into our liquor business, I think we're in a really good shape.
Yeah, no kidding. Now, some of the trends, I wanted to just touch on a couple of trends with you as we kind of come towards the end of our discussion together. But, first of all, I want to talk, since you're now a liquor retailer, there's, the big thing that made change in the liquor business was, ready to drink beverages. I read a lot about non-alcoholic beverages now. Is there anything that has really grabbed your attention in that business that, other than being there and doing all the great things, is there any trends you've already picked up on? I know your ear is tight to the ground when you invest in these businesses. Anything that jumps out that you wanted to share with us? Yeah,
I mean, for me, I'm a product, merchant at heart. I suppose that's certainly where I get a ton of excitement from. And so when we're looking at these businesses, not only kind of and for me, kind of understanding them, at the data that comes out and what's in the marketplace. The RTD, or the ready to drink category, is there's a ton of, I feel like there's a new product, a new brand that comes out about every other week.
Yeah.
But what's been interesting, I suppose, where they were, maybe more heavily based vodka, significant for so long. You're seeing, obviously, tequila with the Olay, really strong brand, RTD drink overall. The gin, kind of additives and mixtures, and those have kind of come in more, in the last couple of years. I don't know if there's a trend I could really kind of speak to, but I suppose, like most alcohol pieces now, it's reinventing, and it's like brand, it's more brand driven. So I would suspect that we'll probably see a celebrity backing some RTD drink at some point. Maybe it's Ryan Reynolds. I don't know, but
he had a good run. He had a good run with his gin, aviation gin. I'm like, why is this guy investing in this and investing in this product? But I think it turned out okay for him.
It sure did. Yeah. So I think there's, I think it's going to continue to play a role. And I think non-alcoholic is, whether it's the liquor store that is the beneficiary of that, or it's the grocery store, hopefully we're hedged enough. But I think we're already kind of seeing that. And I think there's just a much better offering to the consumer than there has been in the past. That's for sure.
Last couple of quick questions for you. I've been thinking a lot about retail technology, and as people are hard to find, and that is a constant, and that may be for many years to come. So retailers are turning their mind to different types of technology, but of course, there's a lot of technology. You mentioned earlier on the conversation, you're probably not a big fan of self-checkout because that's not really your model. That kind of, that kind of unattended checkout is, for somebody else maybe. But what in-store technology are you excited about that you think can really make a material difference to the business from a productivity perspective?
Yeah, I guess I had the advantage of spending quite a time at the leading end of retail technology for quite some time, and going through the phases of spending a lot of money on things that added very little value to the business but looked neat.
Yeah.
We could probably all go back to looking at the giant screen to order products from in the store, or the wayfinder, as you kind of walk into a store that probably didn't require that had low utilization of any kind. So there was lots of things I think that have come and gone. I think the things that are interesting to me are things that are essentially accretive to the business and offer value to the customer. So I think there is a place for self-checkouts in locations because I think it offers, gives an offering for convenience for small purchases. Therefore, kind of opening up larger checkouts for larger purchases and maybe a better service as a result. I think we just installed the digital shelf tags very recently, and as a result, we're accretive in terms of where we had people, doing that labor, that work, but also kind of, as it relates to our pricing integrity across the store as well. Sure, so much more significant play. But I think when you kind of go through, many of the things, I think they're, like I said, I think it's very different that we would be looking for in community grocer, being a community grocer versus maybe a big box conventional. But I think there's a ton of interesting things yet to come further up the supply chain. I had recently done some advisory work with a retailer, an online retailer, and one of the focuses was as a marketplace retailer. Getting AI to kind of match supplier early, so that essentially you kind of improve the supply chain and improve the delivery time to the customer at the end of the day, and ultimately every single customer having literally a different experience as a result. So I think there's just so. Kind of the adage of believe that if this supplier looks good for this particular product, well, the customer must like more items from that supplier or that factory. So I think just along those kind of lines, there's a ton of things. So whether it's customer facing, whether it has to do with the facility as a result across the actual building, and I think there's lots of things technology wise to see there. Or whether it's at the product side to those components, or ultimately operational down to the shelf label and self checkout type idea. I think they have to be tangible, and I think they have to kind of be real. But it also means different to different types of retailers as well.
Last question for you: advice to fellow retailers, and I wanted to hone in on career advice, because you've built such an interesting career. 2 starts and 1 stop. If someone is listening to this and aspires to a leadership role, 2 things they should start doing, and 1 thing that, maybe you, through your experience of what you've witnessed, maybe doesn't work so well.
At any level of an organization, the people that get things done at the end of the day, keep being that person. Even if you're not yet noticed, you will be. And I think that's such an important, maybe underestimated, obvious thing. So people that get things done, you'll eventually be noticed, and you'll have an opportunity to do more. I think the second thing is stop. Maybe this is the stop, I suppose. Is thinking it's a pathway that you have, this, because I think you'll be disappointed if you believe it's a linear journey, that you want to go from A to B, and you see yourself as being the CEO in the company that you're in. I think if you have blinders on and you're focused on that, you're likely going to miss out on a tremendous amount of opportunity. And I guess The counter to that, I guess, which would be a go or continue to do more of or do more of. And that is be open to that opportunity. It's not what you, I can assure you, for most people, it's not going to be what you planned.
Right.
But that's a part of the excitement. That's part of the journey. And retail certainly has a tremendous amount of that.
Do you think, just a quick follow-up, do you think retail is still a meritocracy? I mean, I've always viewed it that way, and you kind of inferred that as well. People notice when people get things done and hit their marks and hit their numbers. And regardless of where you came from or how you got there, the merit of what you do is more important than many other things.
Yeah, I do. And I think that at the end of the day, whether we talk about all the technology, branding, great location, great product, all of those things require people. And, and none of this can be done without great people. So, the people that do well and the people that are successful get noticed. And if it's not today, and sometimes it doesn't feel like it's always on your schedule, it will be. And I truly believe that. So I'm probably more in your camp.
Well, great advice, Corey. And thanks again so much for joining me on The Voice of Retail. It's a real treat to catch up with you. Congratulations on both your personal and professional success and on the growth of the business. I wish you continued success in the growth of that business. And looking forward to, I'll be in Vancouver in November, and I hope to get over to Victoria, swing the door, and check it out for myself. But until then, once again, thanks for joining me on the pod.
Thanks so much, Michael. I appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, be sure and follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure to check out my other retail industry media properties, Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis, and the Global E-Commerce Leaders Podcast. Last but not least, if you're into barbecue, check out my YouTube barbecue show, Last Request Barbecue, with new episodes each and every week. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, consumer growth consultant, president of Emmy LeBlanc and Company Inc., Maven Media, and keynote speaker. If you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Safe travels, everyone.